In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear brakes on this Dodge Grand Caravan. Let's get started. With a 19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. Remove the wheel. Remove these two 13mm bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. There's 1 and 2. Now you can pull the caliper right off. You may or may not need a little pry tool to help you out. There we go. Pull it off, and I'm just going to set it aside right over there. That way it doesn't pull on this brake hose. Now remove your pads. Hopefully you don't need to pry these out as well. Remove these two 18mm bolts holding the caliper bracket onto the knuckle. I'm going to leave this one partially threaded in. Also keep in mind this bracket is here. Take these out. Now you can remove your caliper bracket. Remove your rotor. If it's stuck, you can hammer in between the lug studs. That'll usually break it free off the hub. My surface is fairly clean here. I will, however, use a wire brush and not only clean up the surface rust that's here, but also get rid of this old grease. I'm going to spray it with brake parts cleaner and wire brush all of this off. Rinse it. With it wiped off, you can see that even though there is a little bit of rust here, this is not actually rust buildup that sticks out. You want the surface to be nice and flat. If you need to sand it down. Just make sure you don't make it uneven. But basically, you want the rotor to sit nice and flat. Now let's coat this with some anti-seize. Try to keep it light on the coat. You don't want it to spray everywhere once you put the rotor on. And try to avoid putting it on the lug studs. Take your rotor, slide it on. I'm going to put a lug nut on just so it can hold the rotor in place while I do the rest of my work here. There we go. I'm also going to clean the surface with brake parts cleaner and a clean rag. These particular rotors are not coated with oil, but a lot of them are. So it's good to clean off all the oils that are applied from the factory. You don't want any of those on your brakes. To clean the backside, I'm just going to soak the rag and just wipe it off as I spin the rotor. Now let's prepare the caliper bracket. That basically entails cleaning it and re-lubricating it. Let's pop these anti-rattle clips off. You may need a little pry bar or screwdriver to get these off. They stick with the rust especially. Once you get these off, I'm going to take a wire brush and clean in here. Now to avoid the dust, you can spray some brake parts cleaner on here. And this will allow you to wire brush it with a lot less dust going in the air. As you can see, mine's cleaning up pretty well. A lot of times they are extremely rusty, in which case you might consider sanding these down, but a wire brush is doing the trick very nicely for me. They don't need to look brand new, but they do need to basically not have any rust on here, because these areas is where the pads sit, and if they can't sit properly like it was designed, well then they're going to get squished in between the two ends and they can't pivot freely. I'm going to rinse this down. Once this dries up, I'm going to lubricate it. I'm using silicone paste. You want to just put a thin layer on. If you are using silicone paste, just make sure it is rated for brakes, which mine is. If you're using brake grease, well, of course it is already rated for brakes. The reason for that is you don't want anything that'll melt at higher temperatures. Your brakes do get pretty hot as they operate, so if it melts, well, it'll pretty much not be on here anymore. That defeats the purpose of this. Now take your new anti-rattle clips. Make sure you have the correct side. They do have these spring retainers to them. These need to sit on the outside of the caliper bracket. Right here in the middle is where the rotor sits, and if you put them backwards, they're going to hit the rotor. Snap them down all the way until they're pretty much flush here. Put the other side on, just like that. And of course, we're going to do the same to these over here. Now let's pull the slider pins out. Hopefully yours are not seized in here. Sometimes that happens from water getting into the boot. So having said that, also inspect your boot. Mine looks like it's in good shape. It's just a little dirty on the outside, but that's fine. If it pops off like that, no big deal. Since it did, I might as well take advantage of that and clean up this area with my wire brush. Mine looks pretty good. A lot of times rust does build up around that ridge, so you're going to want to wipe that off. If you find that there's a lot of dirty, old, dried up grease in here, stick your rag through, pull it out the other side. What you can do is just squeeze the boot and roll it like that. That's going to allow the grease to basically get stuck on the rag, not in the boot anymore. Now just put this on. There we go. Let's focus on the slider pin now. Take your rag and wipe this off. Mine is in really good shape here. It's not even rusty on the top. This is just orange grease that someone has applied previously. So I'm going to wipe this off. A lot of times rust does build up right on this ridge here. If yours has it, consider replacing it if it's really bad, or just wire brush it and reuse it. That a lot of times does the job. But you want to make sure it's clean so that this can seal up properly. If that can't seal up, water will get in through here and you'll rust out the pin. I'm going to put some grease inside the slider boot here, a little bit more. This is going to act as a reserve of grease for when the slider is operating. I'm going to put the rest on the slider pin itself, and of course right up in this top ridge here, just to seal it up. Slide this in, press it through all the way. You'll notice that sometimes it won't go in. That's because there's air stuck here. So press it down, squeeze the boot, and that'll allow the air to escape. This is what it should look like once you're done. Grease here, here, and throughout the whole slider pin. So now, let's do the same to the other side. This one is in somewhat worse condition. As you can see, this is pretty dried up here. This other side pin is supposed to have a rubber sleeve on here. Mine is missing, so I'm going to have to replace it. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to continue with this, just so I can show you how to finish this brake job. I'm going to clean up all inside here, and of course here, clean my boot, re-grease it. All right, this bracket is now ready to be reinstalled on the vehicle. Now let's put the bracket back on here, line it up. I'm going to put the top bolt in, and when you put the bottom bolt in, remember to reinstall this bracket also. Snug both of them up. The torque for both of these is going to be 74 foot-pounds. All right, let's put the pads on. All pads will have a wear indicator or squealer, whatever you want to call it. For these, it will go on the bottom so that as the rotor spins, it pushes into the wear indicator. To put the pads in, line them up, put them in kind of at an angle, and then twist and push. That should make them slide right in, just like that. Perfect. As you put them in, make sure they slide around smoothly. If they get stuck, or if you need a lot of force to put them in, you didn't clean up top and bottom enough and the rust is actually squishing them, and that's going to cause them to stick. So when you apply the brakes, instead of them releasing, well, they're just going to stick. Let's attach the caliper with only the top bolt so that we can push the piston back without it moving around on us. And this way you're not going to need to hold it much. Okay, start this in a few threads. Let's pop the cap off the bleeder screw. Set that aside safely. With an 11mm wrench, open up your bleeder screw. Work it back and forth. Try not to break it. We have fluid coming out. I'm going to get it loose here. Now, optional but recommended, I'm going to put a hose on the bleeder screw. This is so that it can collect all the fluid that's coming out instead of it going, well, pretty much spraying straight up at the fender well. Now, if you have the special tool for this, you can use that. If not, you can also use some needle nose pliers. Stick it right in the cutouts there, clean it out a little bit if it's rusty, and you're going to want to twist and push at the same time. That's why I have the caliper mounted, because there's quite a bit going on simultaneously. This hose is going to push fluid out now. There we go. All right, I just felt that bottom out. You want to rotate it until it's pushed all the way back. Now let's take our hose off. Because I used the hose, I'm not worried about air being sucked back in. If you don't use it, you're going to want to wait a few seconds or so until no more air comes out of the bleeder screw and you have just a clean, steady flow. For me, if it happened to suck anything back in, it would be fluid. So, pull this off, close off the bleeder screw. Make sure you snug it up nicely. There we go. Clean off any remaining brake fluid that's up here. I'm going to spray it with some brake parts cleaner. You want to get it all off of here so that you don't confuse it for a potential brake fluid leak, which would obviously be dangerous. Once you have all of that cleaned off, cap this back off, and let's put the caliper back onto over the pads here. If you got any brake fluid on the pads, wipe that off. Line all this up. Start this bolt in. Now let's torque both of these, top and bottom, to 26 foot-pounds. There we go. Do the same to the other side of the vehicle. Pump up the brakes, top off the master cylinder to make sure it's full with clean brake fluid, and let's put the wheel on. Let's get the wheel back on. Put on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then we're going to torque them in a cross pattern to 100 foot-pounds. Once again, 100 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them if you want. Pump up your brakes and take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.